sweet conversations between two individuals who are very well versed into the banking ecosystem and get to see everything very up close. The host for this session, may I please invite Anna Green from Amazon Web Services. Anna heads independent software vendor segment at AWS for Asia Pacific and Japan, and has worked as CEO of ANZ Bank. Anna, welcome on board. Are you here?
I am, Saurav, but I just need them to allow me to start my video. The host has stopped it.
Okay, I will request, there you go. Anna, thank you so much for joining us. I will leave you here to invite your guest, Vijay, introduce him, and continue with your session. And I'll join back in about 20-25 minutes to take some Q&As from the audience.
Thank you so much, Saurav. And a really interesting panel discussion just previous to this. I am very interested in it because I've just moved out of the Philippines banking sector in particular to come and head the digital ISV and D&B business here at AWS across Asia, Pacific and Japan. And I am delighted to be joined by our very special guest, Vijay Manoharan. I hope I got that right, Vijay, who is the CEO of CIMB Bank in the Philippines. He's the driving force behind what we've seen as phenomenal growth with the CIMB Bank into the Philippines. He has the country's most awarded all-digital bank in CIMB, which is just fantastic. Under his stewardship, CIMB has signed up to over 4 million customers. And they've only been in operation for 2 years, which is, again, pretty amazing. So that transformation journey of your bank and learning about that is going to be part of our discussion today. Vijay is also well regarded as a CEO across the industry in many different contexts, one of which he was recently awarded the Banking CEO of the Year by both the Global Business Review and also World Business Outlook. And he's bringing a huge amount of leadership and executive experience from various multinational financial institutions. So I am delighted to welcome you here today, Vijay. Thank you so much for joining me for this discussion.
Thank you, Anna. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yes, so am I. And as I said, just to give the audience some context, I'm now running the APJ business for AWS in digital businesses, ISVs and D&Bs. But prior to this, I was the CEO of ANZ Bank in the Philippines. And I spent 2.5 years in that country learning so much about the amazing people and the amazing opportunity that we have to build and grow some really fantastic and innovative banking solutions in the Philippines. Very much because of some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, Vijay, which is that the legacy and on-premises solutions that we have with banks in the Philippines, banks like you are just kind of leapfrogging over the top of all of that and building digital banks from scratch, which I think is just amazing. And certainly when I was a CEO, these are some of the things that we grappled with when we were thinking about how to change our customer proposition. And the Philippines, as you know, has over 120 million people out there who are very keen to start using digital forms of financial transactions to build and grow their own business, to build and be able to use banking in a different way going forward. So look, let's start with that conversation, which is a 2019 report suggested that 71% of Filipino adults are still unbanked. And I think we'll find that that particular statistic is consistent across most of the ASEAN countries, and certainly countries like Indonesia, which are really trying to deal with staggering numbers of unbanked people. So maybe give us your context, Vijay. How are you looking at that cohort of customers, and what are you trying to do to sort of bridge the digital divide?
Sure, Anna. Thank you for that question, and I'm glad to be here, and thank you also for the introduction. Well, it's interesting question there. So for us, to be perfectly honest, it's a really simple problem to solve. If you take away through all the clutter and you think through fundamentally what is the friction, the barrier, that such a large number of Filipinos or Indonesian or any population are not on the formal banking system, then you discover there are some fundamental common issues which are sort of preventing the consumer from getting onto the banking platform. So when we came into the Philippines in 2018, we took a stance or view, how can we really unbank banking? So how can we make the banking experience not like the banking experience that what consumers have been presented in the past? So what does this mean? So this means really, how do we fundamentally change the banking experience where it's a whole lot more simpler and really a whole lot more less intimidating? Because, I remember a point of time in my life, even in my life, there was that banking was quite intimidating. Banking was quite something which was a challenge to fully grapple with. So we said, to tackle this 71% as you quoted, which are still unbanked, even those that are underbanked, not just the unbanked, even those that are underbanked, we need to fundamentally address a few pain points. And what is that? So we took the approach of solving it. First, how can we make the onboarding and the experience to sign up to a bank account a whole lot more easier? So that's when we said, let's make the account opening as simple as going to a 7-Eleven, as simple as going to a convenience store and taking a bottle of Coke or taking a bag of chips, paying for it and walking out, and you're done. So this whole notion of once and done. So creating an experience where it's all digital, you do it in the comfort of your own home, 7 days a week, and a once and done experience. That was the first thing that we said we want to go solve, and we felt that would really address one of the key friction where today the experience of getting onto a banking account or banking system, it's quite cumbersome, it's quite tough. Then lowering the barriers of signing up. Now, what does that mean? So we made the experience to actually get a basic account to be a whole lot more easier. For example, you only need one ID, not multiple IDs to register. Most of the 110 million Filipinos today, many of them don't have really the multiple IDs, so the stringent ID requirements which bank used to have. So we tried to find a way to stay within regulations, but simplify those requirements to actually open an account, even to the point of opening a more basic account, and over time regularizing it as they get their IDs in a 6-12 months period. Then the other thing that we also thought about is how then, if once making the experience to onboard easier by removing the friction and making it all digital, which is great, but I don't think it's enough. So we said we had to, in return, give back some real value, because just making it easier would not get people to say, no, I want it. There's got to be a reason bigger than that. And what is that reason? So we said, let's change the give and get equation today, where consumers today are not getting a whole lot from their banking when they bank, or if they choose to bank. So we said, let's pay some very attractive interest rates in the deposits that we hold for the consumer. So we have the best rates in the market. We don't charge any fees whatsoever to a customer when they have their money with us. This whole notion about us taking consumers' money and then charging them a fee, we found that a bit paradoxical. So we said, let's not charge any fees, make it zero fees. And you may know from being in the Philippines, it's a high fee regime. And we wanted to see how we can break that. So we made the proposition also more attractive. Consumers get a high return with high interest on their deposits and zero fees for transactions, as no maintaining balance, and they can open an account with just even zero balance. So all this we felt as are the ingredients to answer your question on how we can get more and more unbanked and underbanked onto the formal banking platform.
Wow, that's a very comprehensive context, Vijay. And I see that you are taking, or you're building from learnings across multiple digital banks in the region and how they're seeing success. But what I love about that, and coming to AWS, we pivot on that, which is your customer focus. So you're no longer thinking about banking as a margin-driven business. You're actually thinking about it building back from What does the customer want? The customer doesn't want fees. The customer wants ease of access. The customer wants one way to engage with their bank and be able to use that identification process potentially for various different products. So I think that's a really interesting lens that you can give us on how you're thinking about banking and building those retail banking models in a consumer context. So maybe we could move on then to thinking about that in particular. How are banks transforming themselves to become digital banks? Because we're seeing so many digital banks come up in the market. They're always talking about disruption. But to your point, in the Philippines, it's a very traditional banking environment, which relies on traditional banking models and traditional banking IT solutions, I might suggest, which we both know have their challenges. As everyone on the call will be aware, the infrastructure of a banking environment that sits behind the customer experience, particularly in a traditional sense, is incredibly complex. You're likely to have hundreds and hundreds of systems talking to each other on any one given day, on any one given transaction. So it's a very complex traditional legacy migration structure that you are dealing with when you're dealing with a traditional bank. But what I know is that CIMB has actually been mapping those traditional banking processes with a digital new age consumer experience in mind. So tell us, how have you thought through that operation?
Yeah, sure. And so this from a technology still, I'll bring two lenses. One is from a technology standpoint, second from a business standpoint. So I'll start with the technology standpoint first. So we wanted to have a platform which as you said, we avoid bringing in a whole bunch of applications and tying things together and making the whole platform complicated. So we want to make it simple, where we had a very robust integrated architecture between the front end, the middleware, the core, and all the ancillary services pretty much integrated. So for us, we went through a route where we have a platform which is a microservices based, cloud native, which will enable us to scale up, even scale down if we have to on a flick of a switch. So we were very clear that we are building a platform to support a scale-up business and to really have a platform that is nimble enough and will really help us to do two things. One is keep us having that speed to market advantage, and second, to also have a platform which can easily integrate to the ecosystem. Because I'll talk more about this later. Because CIMB Philippines, we like to think of ourselves not only as a digital bank, we like to think of ourselves as an ecosystem player which uses digital as a means of going to market. So we see ourselves as an ecosystem bank, which actually we tie up with partners and we establish partnerships in terms of how we go to market. And with that, you will need a stack which is very sort of nimble in terms of how we integrate and also how we sort of be able to sort of go to market together with our partners using APIs and open banking and enabling that in a very fast fashion. Now, shifting to how CIMB Philippines, being part of a bigger group as we are part of CIMB in the region, I think what benefit that we have as a digital bank, where we bring some uniqueness in terms of how we think about the business model, how we think about P&Ls, which are very different, and also how we think about building partnerships and the whole entrepreneurial driven sort of culture that we have here in the Philippines. But we are fortunate enough to also leverage on what certain traditional banking processes, believe it or not, which are still very relevant for a digital bank like us. So what would that be? That will be areas when it comes to controls and compliance. So we tap on what we see as strengths from the bank, which is a traditional bank, in terms of areas of compliance, risk management, even internal audit, where these are areas that we sort of adopt and we leverage the best practices from the group and use that to integrate into our model. So we use the uniqueness that we have, the platforms that we have, but tap into what the group has, which are also fundamentally important towards creating a successful platform and successful model. So our approach is kind of the best of breeds, where we combine what works for us and coming up with a formula that I think makes a whole lot of sense for us in the Philippines.
You must have some interesting scenario analysis off the back of that, Vijay, because as you say, taking old school technology and applying it to what is a very new customer experience, banking digitally, it's a really, it's a very complex journey. It's not an easy one to navigate. So very interesting, your insights on that one. So when we speak about digital, as I said, personalization is not too far off. Meaning that, to some extent, banking services may become white labeled even. That can be, we are already seeing that in various parts of the industry, but certainly that's something that is in the future now for all banks. So how are you dealing with the personalization versus privacy paradox, which again, we see that conversation coming up in developed markets already, and certainly in developing markets, our regulators are interested in that too. So can you tell us about how CIMB is looking at that, and how you are managing with the BSP and all of those different regulators that care very much about consumer privacy? How are you managing that regulatory environment? Give us some context on that.
Sure, Anna. So I guess there are a couple of things. In terms of privacy laws and the privacy regulations, the good thing about it is very clear. So it spells out what the bank or even the institution can or cannot do when it comes how we use data and how we engage consumers and how we engage potential customers or even our customers. So regulations are quite clear. So I think that's one benefit. So we use that as a strong guide in terms of how we operate. But really, this whole thing is a fine balance. As you correctly, I think, alluded to, digital in itself lends itself to data, to really collections of immense amount of data, and using data as a comparative advantage. And that's what really digital means, at least to us, where it enables us to use data really as means to engage and to really take us to extra step forward. So to us, it's really about how do we strike the right balance. So it's always this whole thing about data privacy and consumer protection. It's when you get a bit callous and you get a bit carried away, and you don't do things that make sense. So I think if you apply common logic, and I think if you apply the right sort of actions and practices. What do I mean by that? So consumers would love to be talked to any time of the day if what you're talking to them is meaningful to them. So if you're just throwing them garbage, now obviously they're going to feel spammed. They're going to feel that you are being intrusive. They're going to feel that you are being irrelevant to them. That's when it gets to that uncomfortable relationship. But if you use data in the right way, if you really understand your customers, you get them down to a segment of one, you know what their needs are, and you're really talking to them where it creates value, then you don't have that issue. So for us, really, is operate within the guardrails of the regulations and stay within that. There's no two ways about that. Then really using analytics and really using deep analytics, and really understanding what our customer wants and really talk to them in the way that they want us to talk to them. So engaging them where it's relevant to the consumer, targeted, really, and really understanding how they want us to talk to them and where and when as well, and giving them the option. So we empower the consumer to then decide whether they want us to talk to them or they want us to talk to them less, or even choose the channels in a way we can engage them. So that gives the right balance, so the consumer then will feel that they're in control of how much or how little that CIMB can talk to them. So that's kind of how we see it. This whole privacy laws, it's always going to be there, and it's something where you can't cross the line. But to us, really empowering the consumer understanding regulations, and using data intelligently so that when you talk to the consumer, they find value in when you engage them.
Yeah, so a really personalized conversation with the consumer, complying with the regulatory environment, which is constantly changing around this particular issue. So I'm sure you will be leading by example in that context, Vijay, because as I recall, making sure you comply with regulations is probably one of the biggest problem statements of any CEO of any bank, and doing it in line with the vision that the country has for the future. And I know the Philippines has a vision around how it wants to digitize not just banking, but all of the industries across the country. So I'm sure you're a partner in that, and we're interested to hear from you in terms of how you build that going forward. So look, last question. Retail banking applications are sitting on everybody's mobile home screen now, and have started to compete for our users' attention as well. So when we're thinking about competing with other banks, the apps that you are now competing with are not just banks, they're also ride hailing, they're food delivery. You know, a lot of my customers in the DNB space, digital native customers, are thinking about how to propose a banking solution as well. So we're seeing this real interesting play happening between cross-industry applications. And banking is just one of those, as I said, white label potentially products that can be used for a customer when they're thinking about how they want to engage with their applications on their phone. So another thing that we're seeing is so much of our banking environment is now moving to a mobile first application model. So tell us what you're thinking in terms of how banking is facing into that level of competition.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So I may have alluded to this early on, but I will start off with a bit of a left field sort of approach. So I would say we may be the only, if not very handful few, digital bank that's labeled digital bank, which really don't force our customers to use our apps or to use our banking app. So I think what I mean by that is we believe in this this notion of ecosystem. I alluded to that earlier. So what does that mean a little bit? So what it means is we exist where the consumer exists. And I've said it before, we fundamentally believe, as I fundamentally believe, that consumers don't wake up every morning and want to go to the bank or want to go to the banking app even. So I don't fundamentally believe that I wake up in the morning and I want to go to my app, my banking app, and check on it. That's not how, at least we think, consumer psyche is. So we believe in ourselves as a bank to immerse ourselves, to integrate and make ourselves present and bring our services to where the consumers go day to day for their daily needs. And what would be the daily needs? Some of it you mentioned earlier. For example, to catch a ride, to order food, to transact online, to buy something from an e-commerce platform, to shop to buy a movie ticket, to buy a concert ticket. All those verticals or all those areas where a consumer goes to on a day-to-day basis, we want to be present there. So we don't see ourselves as wanting to own a real estate on your phone. We don't see ourselves as wanting to mandate all CIMB customers must have an app on your device. We understand there's enough apps that have
Anna, did you also lose Vijay?
I'm afraid I did, just in the middle of what was a very interesting anecdote about applications, which phone apps, which I think is a super interesting conversation, which maybe we can come back to, Saurabh.
Yes, absolutely. Vijay's joined us from the US, so he's in a different time zone as well. Let's wait for him. I had joined just at the right time, I guess. There are a few questions in the audience, and there's one particular question which I was gonna throw at you, Anna, if that's okay. There's a question from Vikas Sharma. He's joined us from Melbourne. I'll read it out. In Australia, the fact that you're from Australia, Traditional banks, the big four dominate the market, but we see the new fintechs and disruptors now coming in to change the experience and customer expectations like we have seen throughout Asia. And you worked for a bank in Australia, you've been a CEO in Asia though for an Australian bank. What is the future of traditional players in competing with the new entrants?
I think what I see in Asia versus Australia is that unlike Australian banks, Asian banks have a much more, I would say, enthusiastic engagement around building out digital offerings. I know that the big four in Australia are working on that, and they have a portfolio of ways in which they're approaching it. But I would say that the large banks here in Asia, because of the population here, the mix of the population, most of the retail customers are doing everything, not just banking, everything on their phone. So companies like CIMB and Vijay are doing exactly the right thing, which is thinking about the future population of ASEAN and Southeast Asia, which a third of which are under the age of 30 and are very familiar with digital technology. So when we're thinking about the opportunity, and as well, they are becoming more affluent, which means they have more money and they're able to think differently about the way in which they engage with banking products. And they want that experience to be the same experience that they have with whether it be where they're choosing music, where they're getting food delivered, how they're getting a cab. These are things that this generation is completely familiar with. And therefore, what I see in Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, is a very large population that is very engaged, India as well, on an application-based model. And I see the banks in Southeast Asia in particular being very interested in building those offerings. Whereas in Australia, it's a very different mindset in terms of the way the banking industry engages with their customers. So different stages of development and progression, but certainly what Vijay has been talking about is what I see happening across Southeast Asia more broadly. And hello to everyone in Melbourne, hello to everyone in Australia, and of course Southeast Asia, most importantly the Philippines, however, because that's who we're talking about at the moment. So hi to everyone.
Yeah, and I'm back. I'm sorry, I got kicked out earlier. Can you hear me now?
Okay, Vijay. Yes, we can hear you fine. We move to the Q&A, given that we've got less than 6 minutes. So we don't want to take too much of your time. We'll try and stick within the time window. I have another interesting question from Daniel Teodorico Capuan. Any disruption or innovation outside financial services sector that will greatly impact how banks serve the customer in the near future? So, I think having local data hosting in every country would be one value add from the likes of AWS, of course.
Indeed.
It will enable banks to be able to do more things, but anything else you could think of?
So I think, privacy and security is really big, right? And if you're thinking about regulatory environments, that's where we're going with the banking conversation. And the first thing a CEO is going to say is, my regulator says I can't do that because I need to keep my data onshore. So that's where AWS is really thinking differently about how we are treating data lakes, how we are treating customer information to make sure that where the regulator has a requirement around security and privacy, we're able to accommodate that from a regulatory perspective, but also to ensure that the customer gets the best possible service. And often that has to be in a cloud-first environment and can be facilitated via a cloud-first environment. So my views would be, anything that we can do around privacy and security to help people to build disruptive product, particularly in the cloud, is going to be where we see innovation and opportunity for banking. What about you, Vijay?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think it's a great point. Let's add one piece of view. I think it's the changes when it comes to ownership, where more and more non-bank large conglomerates now want to become banks. So that will really also change how the banking landscape is played. So if you can see now markets like Malaysia, Singapore, even in Hong Kong, where digital banking licenses are being issued, to also enable non-banks to now become banks, that will really change the whole equation in terms of how banking services are offered, and also will force traditional banks to also quickly disrupt within themselves to also compete with these non-banking players who are now becoming banks.
Yep, absolutely. I think the rise of Grabs and Gojeks, and embarking on the digital services industry and now trying to get into the banking space challenges traditional banks to be more digital savvy and be more targeted. And I think the advantage these organizations have is they are digital first already, whereas banks have to now reinvent themselves and plug themselves out of the non-digital world, and that's not just technology, that's also their people.
Yeah,
typically
and I would add to that those companies have an advantage over banks in that they know how to use data. So they've built their entire business model off the back of understanding how to use data, and in particular provide what Vijay is talking about, which is a targeted end user customer experience. They have built their entire business model on that. And as you know, banks traditionally have not built their entire business. They have built their entire business model on margin, pricing. These are things that come first with traditional banks, whereas digital banks are taking the exact opposite view, which is who is my customer? How do I build back from that to give them an experience that they are looking for, similar to if they were using, as I said, a ride-hailing app or something like that. So the rise of the super app, in conjunction with, as Vijay has said, the issuance of more digital banking licenses, is going to see a complete change in the environment in Southeast Asia in particular.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's an inherent advantage because these players, they already from the get-go, they know so much more about a consumer than a bank would know. So they know where you commute, where you top up, your lifestyle is within what they can see to their lenses. So that's already the advantage that they have to be able to start create and curate unique offerings based on the segments of who they have.
We'll ask one last question, Vijay. It's specifically for CIMB Bank, and we'll try and wrap up. What are the opportunities for CIMB Philippines to expand its services to other digital products, such as unit trust, EGIA, etc.?
Okay, so we are very careful in terms of what we choose to do and what we choose not to do. So we want to make sure that everything that we touch, we are solving a real problem, and we can achieve scale from that. So the lens that we look at is there a need? Can we bring some true value? And can we achieve scale? So those are some of our decision points before we do anything. So there are conversations around new opportunities. We are looking to expand. I can share. I think the next shift for us is how do we solve the SME space? I think we've sort of brought a very interesting proposition to the retail space. I think the SME space is something we are trying to find a nice balance to do something interesting. But we'll take it gradually. We're not in a hurry to do everything. We'll never be a single bank for everybody. We'll choose to choose the areas we want to play, what makes sense to us and to the consumer, and that's what we'll be doing in a nutshell.
Thank you, Vijay. I've written it down. Identify the need, determine value, and then scale. I think that doesn't just apply to banks, but I think that pretty much applies to every organization, every bank, every non-digital or digital organization. You continue identifying customer needs, continue identifying what value you add, and only then you start scaling. Thank you.
Yes, but Saurabh, let me add to that, which is really important, and it's the difference that I've seen moving from banking into technology, is that the urgency within which that needs to be articulated from a banking strategy and vision perspective has become far more critical. We had, traditional, and Vijay will know this, but traditional banks' kind of 3-year plan and strategy has gone from a 3-year plan to a 2-year plan to a 1-year plan to now, what are we doing in the next 6 months? So it's a very interesting conversation, and it's a change in mindset, to your earlier point, Saurabh, which is skill sets is one thing, but you've also got to get the mindset of the CEOs to change, because unless they do, they're going to find themselves missing the market. So it's a super interesting part of the world to be working in, and a lot of interesting things happening in Asia, in particular in digital banking. And congratulations to Vijay on everything he's done, and thank you for joining us. It's such an interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Great. It was lovely to have you both on board. I'll do a couple of closing remarks, and then we can bring today's session to a close. Thank you so much, Anna and Vijay. Such a pleasure to host this session with you both. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting the entire summit today. The session prior to this one was very insightful as well. I'm very excited to see the evolution of digital banking and certainly how we here at MoEngage will evolve as a marketing technology company and continue supporting personalization and privacy needs of new age banking and fintech organizations. That's something I'm personally working on with the team. With that, I'd like to bring today's summit to a close. Any closing remarks from both you and Anna and Vijay before we close on? Anna?
I think, as I said, a super interesting industry discussion, incredibly salient points being made by Vijay today and the panelists earlier. I'm so glad that MoEngage is driving this discussion. It is an important discussion at an industry level and driving change and customer solutions, and obviously doing that on the cloud, which to me is, super valuable, because these are the conversations that I'm hearing from customers. How do we not just transform, but how do we transform in a cloud context for the future? How do we build digital banking models for the future? So super excited, and thank you very much, Saurabh, for having me on the call.
It's been a pleasure, Anna. Vijay, anything from you before we close?
Well, Saurabh, thank you again for hosting the event. I want to thank MoEngage for getting all of us together. Anna, thank you also for moderating. I would just say that indeed, you're right. It's an exciting space. I think what is happening now in the last 6-12 months, it's definitely going to change the entire game significantly. So I would say, looking ahead 12 months from now, if we talk this whole moving parts and this whole banking dynamics and the whole digital dynamics will be very much different. I think every 12 months, you're going to see a huge step shift and huge transformation in what players are doing and what consumers are experiencing. So I think this space is for us to watch. And I think the next 12, 24 months is just going to be super, super exciting. And there's a lot of things that's going to be happening. I think the end winner, hand to heart, I think the consumers are going to win. And that's probably a good thing for everybody.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Vijay, for staying back and helping me run today's session. With that, we'll bring today's conversation to a close.